So Terraform or infrastructure as code, is that a skill that you need to pick up? Is it worth spending time doing? I don't know. But I'm hoping to tell you my story and the reason why I spent time learning it and the usefulness that it's been to me and see if those reasons make sense to you or not. So when I was starting off in ops, I had to do tasks, right? You got to go through and learn the things, and something I often had to do is I had a request for a server. Say, hey, come through. I need you to build X. It needs to be Ubuntu. It needs to be Windows. It needs to be X, Y, Z. And the way you do that in AWS is you go onto AWS, you jump onto the GUI, you figure out all the things you need to add, right? Okay, you can't click that checkbox with the network or with the security group until you go through and do it. And once you have finally gone through all the necessary things, you can build that server. You can proceed on and you've completed the task. But Zach's life, Zach's work didn't end there, right? Inevitably, once people find out that you can do X, you can build servers, another problem pops up. I need you to build N servers, right? This number might be 2, it might be 10, it might be 100. You might not be able to use fancy auto-scaling groups. These might be hand-built, handcrafted goodness. And so you've got to figure out something better, some way that doesn't involve you going through and clicking through each of those things. So you might go use an SDK like Boto3, that's Amazon's Python library, and you might figure out which configs you need to do. You might come through and inject in all those details. You have to figure out how to do Python. I didn't know how to code at the time, right? I have to figure out, hey, I've got a loop. What kind of loop do I use here, right? And you got to validate and run. Does this thing actually do what I thought it does? Does it have the right effect? Is there any side effects that this thing does that I don't care for or I didn't anticipate? But at the end of the day, you can go through and you can build N servers. That's great. That was Zach's next step of how do I solve problems? How do I scale beyond how fast can I click? But then when that happens, you find out you built something wrong. Hey, that configuration we told you about, it's no longer the case, right? We've got an update that we need you to go through and do. All those servers, those N servers that you built, they've got to be updated. And guess what? You can go to AWS and you can go to Boto3. That old utility is not going to do it. Its only job is to create servers. It doesn't do updates. It doesn't do replacements, right? You could go through and hand delete all those items, but guess what? You're going to need a script, a new utility built to delete those items and only those items, right? You're going to end up in this world of building new utilities all the time just to get your little update done. So that was the problem, and I wasn't sure how to fix that in a way that wasn't painful, that didn't have me living in these SDKs perpetually. But then another problem reared its head, right? I have all this AWS knowledge. What if I have to go to Google Cloud? What if I have to go do the thing on Azure, right? Now I've got to take the entire library that I spent time learning. Right? I can use my Python, but I've got to throw away how I did my configuration, how I brought in the client, how I did my authentication, and all of that knowledge isn't particularly useful for me beyond how do I run a loop and how do I define a dictionary in my Azure implementation, right? And so that knowledge that I spent time learning is only useful in a small set, right? The GUI is completely out, right? The buttons don't look anything alike. The terms that they use aren't anything like the terms that they were using before. So this is another spot, right? Where, okay, I've got to repeat those first 2 problems and solve them all over again. Do I have different libraries? And this is where Terraform shines. This is why I spent time learning Terraform, and I think you should too, right? Terraform is essentially a recipe, right? It is one language. It is specific to do one thing and try to stay to do that one thing well, right? That Linux philosophy of take the small component and to do it well is really where it shines. And so declaring an instance in Amazon, right, doesn't require me to have to go find out what that thing is called. It doesn't have to take me a bunch of click through documentation to find out what are the different prerequisites. It's in one format, all written in one post of every requirement you might need and what you need to proceed on. And you can see it is 6 lines. It is 7 lines of code for me to build this instance. If I want to build a storage bucket, right, that thing is 7 lines. There's not too much to figure out. And we can just plumb in the variables that we need. I don't really need that Python knowledge and all that encompasses for me to be able to do those simple things. And so this has been a great thing for me to learn initially because it helped me to learn the platform. It helped me be able to do what I needed to do without having a whole bunch of other knowledge that I needed to acquire. I could spend my time doing the task and not learning how to do the task. And so when I got to the point where I say, okay, great, I need to create 100 of these things, 1,000 things, how do I loop through this? And so Terraform has a few different methods, right? One of them is this count index. You say how many of these things you want, And guess what? You can even do fancy things like include references to that or bring in other information related on how many counts that you're doing. Building 1,000 instances isn't much more complicated than creating just one instance. And that makes it nice and easy. No additional scripts needed. But what about that problem, right? What if I have to create this thing on Azure? What if I have to create this on Google Cloud? What if this is Cloudflare, right? Something completely different. Is Terraform still relevant? Can I do these things? And the example is yes, right? That same documentation, that same kind of layout, that provider, right, gives us a single spec for how to build resources with a given provider. And so you can see here, right, the Azure specification has a few of its own terms, right? But it smells a lot like the AWS configuration that we're doing, right? And you can run these things side by side, right? Your Terraform script can do Azure and AWS things. It can do GCP and Cloudflare things. And it doesn't require you to learn a whole new language. You just learn, hey, what does it need? And go forward. And you can build those things. But the critical thing, the thing that really makes Terraform shine is this idea of idempotency, right? The ability to run your script many different times and to only update the things that need to be updated, right? So if I found out to say, hey, Zach, that hello world, you're missing a dash there. I don't know if you've noticed past Zach. But we can simply just update this, right? We can update our code, and we can include that dash that we in, and we can rerun it. And what Terraform will do is it will scan through all the resources that we've ever built. It will see, hey, your configuration changed and added that dash. And not only is it smart enough to find just those changed aspects, but it will just update in place whenever possible, right? So it doesn't have to tear down those servers. So I don't have to write a new utility to go and do that. I can simply update the thing that needs to be updated and be done with it. And that is the power of Terraform, right? The ability to build resources with simple language, to spend your time learning a thing that can be used in lots of different scenarios, to be able to update in place without having to build unique or individual scripts, to be able to pull information in as needed, and to be able to do that one thing well. So you can spend your time completing the task and not learning many different disciplines in order for you to be able to do it. Thanks for listening.